The lawyer handed over the deed to a collapsing, rat-infested theatre, and the room erupted in laughter. They thought she was the punchline to her grandfather's final joke. But beneath the rotting stage lay a secret that would soon wipe the smug smiles off their faces forever. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Abernathy and Associates felt less like a place of legal business and more like a predatory enclosure. Outside the 24th floor windows, the Chicago skyline was a blanket of gray, mirroring the heavy atmosphere inside. Madeline sat at the far end of the sprawling table, acutely aware of the frayed cuffs of her wool coat. Across from her sat Aunt Evelyn, wrapped in pristine white cashmere, and Cousin Gregory, who was busy checking his designer watch with a sigh of exaggerated boredom. The man of the hour, or rather, the deceased, was Harrison Hughes, a man who had built a quiet, staggering fortune in maritime logistics. Harrison was known for his sharp mind, his eccentric habits, and his complete emotional detachment from his family, except, perhaps, for Madeline. She had spent her childhood summers listening to his wild stories about the 1970s, back when he had brushed shoulders with the city's underground elite. But when she needed a loan to cover her late mother's crushing medical bills 2 years ago, Harrison had coldly refused. Madeline had never forgiven him for that. Mr. Abernathy, a lawyer with a voice like dry gravel, cleared his throat. "We will now conclude the distribution of Mr. Hughes's assets." Evelyn leaned forward, the diamonds at her throat catching the fluorescent light. "To my sister, Evelyn," the lawyer read, adjusting his spectacles, "and her son, Gregory, I leave the entirety of the liquid assets, the maritime stock portfolio, and the primary estate in Grosse Pointe. This amounts to approximately $14.6 million. Gregory let out a low whistle, leaning back and shooting Madeline a triumphant, mocking smirk. Evelyn simply nodded, as if this staggering wealth was merely her due. "And finally," Mr. Abernathy continued, the paper rustling in his hands. He looked up, his eyes meeting Madeline's with a flash of unmistakable pity. "To my niece Madeline, I leave the entirety of the property located at 412 Sycamore Street in downtown Detroit, the Orpheum Grand Theatre." Silence stretched across the room. Then Gregory barked a harsh, ugly laugh. "The Orpheum?" Evelyn chuckled, a sound like clinking ice cubes. "That old eyesore. Harrison bought that ruin 30 years ago during a midlife crisis. The roof collapsed a decade ago." "Mr. Abernathy," Madeline interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "Is there any financial stipend attached to the property, for maintenance or sale?" The lawyer offered a grimace. "I'm afraid not, Miss Madeline. Furthermore, the property comes with inherited encumbrances. There are back taxes owed to the city of Detroit. $380,000 to be exact. If the debt is not settled within 90 days, the city will seize the property and hold you personally liable for the remaining balance." Gregory slapped the table, openly laughing now. "So the old man gave us the fortune and gave you a $400,000 debt? That is priceless. You always thought you were his favorite, Maddie. Looks like you were just the punchline to his final joke." "Gregory, enough," Evelyn said, though a cruel smile lingered on her lips. "Madeline, dear, if you need to declare bankruptcy, I know a very affordable paralegal." Madeline didn't reply. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking, and walked out of the office. Her chest was tight, panic rising in her throat like bile. She was already working double shifts as a graphic designer just to keep her apartment. Now, she had 90 days to figure out how to sell a condemned, debt-ridden building in a blighted neighborhood before it dragged her into complete financial ruin. 2 days later, Madeline parked her battered sedan across from 412 Sycamore Street. The Orpheum Grand was a towering monument to decay. Its once glorious Art Deco facade was black with decades of urban grime. The Grand Marquis was rusted and stripped of its letters, save for a hanging O and an M. The towering wooden entry doors were chained shut and covered in gang graffiti. Armed with a heavy pair of bolt cutters she'd bought at a pawn shop, Madeline snapped the rusty chain. She pulled the heavy door open, stepping into the cavernous lobby. The smell hit her instantly. A thick, suffocating mix of mildew, pigeon droppings, and rotting wood. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing shattered crystal chandeliers lying in heaps of plaster on the mosaic floor. The grand staircase, once covered in crushed red velvet, was a precarious slope of rotten timber. "It's worse than useless," Madeline whispered to the empty room, tears of sheer exhaustion pricking her eyes. "Why did you do this to me, Grandpa?" She walked into the main auditorium. The ceiling had partially caved in, allowing a single dramatic short of grey daylight to pierce the gloom, illuminating the mouldering stage. It was a complete disaster. It would cost millions just to make it safe, let alone functional. She couldn't sell it. No developer would touch a property with this much structural damage and a massive tax lien. She sat down on an overturned velvet chair, burying her face in her hands. She was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. Desperation breeds strange alliances. By the end of the week, Madeline had realized she couldn't even sell the land without an environmental safety assessment and a basic clearing of the hazardous debris. She couldn't afford a commercial crew, so she turned to the darkest corners of local classifieds. That was how she met Benjamin Cole. Benjamin was a grizzled 50-something contractor with a permanent scowl, hands like sandpaper, and a reputation for doing demolition work on the cheap, asking 0 questions. When he first walked through the Orpheum with Madeline, he spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ruined lobby floor. "Lady, this ain't a renovation. This is a graveyard," Benjamin grunted, shining his heavy-duty flashlight up at the sagging balcony. "The moisture rot is structural. You've got asbestos in the ceiling tiles and lead paint on every surface. To clear it enough to get the city off your back for a land sale, it'll run you at least 15 grand. "I have 3,000, Madeline said firmly, standing her ground despite her pounding heart. "And you keep whatever architectural salvage you find. Copper wiring, the brass handrails, the intact vintage fixtures. That salvage is worth 20,000 easily. We do it under the table." Benjamin paused, chewing on the inside of his cheek. He looked at the ornate brass fixtures lining the ruined walls. "You pull the permits for a minor cleanup. We don't touch the main structural beams. I bring 2 of my guys. 3 grand cash, plus all the salvage. Deal." The work began the following Monday. The theater became a war zone of dust masks, crowbars, and wheelbarrows. Madeline didn't sit back. She wrapped her hair in a bandana, put on heavy work gloves, and started clearing the administrative offices on the 2nd floor, while Benjamin's crew attacked the ruined seating in the auditorium. The office was a time capsule from the early 1980s, layered in an inch of undisturbed dust. Madeline pried open the rusted drawers of a massive mahogany desk, throwing moldy ledgers and water-damaged ticket rolls into a heavy-duty trash bag. As she tried to pull out the bottom drawer, it stuck. She yanked it hard, the wood splintering. A false panel at the back of the drawer collapsed, revealing a hidden cavity. Madeline froze. Inside the cavity was a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped package. She carefully pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat. Unwrapping the stiff, smelling cloth, she found a small black leather journal and a heavy iron key. The journal was filled with her grandfather Harrison's jagged handwriting. But it wasn't a diary of his shipping empire. The entries dated back to 1982. October 14th. The Antwerp consignment is too hot. Interpol raided the docks in Brussels. The insurance company paid out, but the buyers are dead or in jail. We are sitting on 40 million in ice. Madeline frowned, flipping the pages. Ice, November 2nd. Bought the Orpheum today. A perfect tomb. No one looks twice at a dying theater in a dying city. They think I'm crazy. Let them. The projector's blind spot holds the sun. Madeline stared at the words. The projector's blind spot holds the sun. Her grandfather wasn't just a shipping magnate. He was running a smuggling operation. He had used his cargo ships to move something illicit. But what? And what did he mean by the projector's blind spot? She grabbed her flashlight and the heavy key, running out of the office and down the crumbling hallway toward the projection booth. The booth sat at the highest point of the balcony, overlooking the stage. The heavy metal door was rusted shut. She kicked it hard, twice, until the ancient latch gave way. She stumbled into the small, windowless room. It was dominated by two massive antique carbon arc film projectors, rusting silently like dead mechanical beasts. The air here was incredibly dry, devoid of the rot that plagued the rest of the building. Madeline moved to the small, square viewing ports cut into the thick wall, looking down at the ruined stage. The projector's blind spot. She stood exactly where a projectionist would stand. The projectors fired straight ahead through the glass slots. She turned around, examining the rear wall of the room. It was covered in faded acoustic soundproofing tiles. But why would you need heavy soundproofing on the back wall of a projection booth where the machinery faced forward? "Benjamin!" Madeline yelled, her voice echoing down the stairwell. "Benjamin, get up here!" A few minutes later, the contractor appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily, a pry bar resting on his shoulder. "What?" "Floor collapse." "Hand me that pry bar," she demanded. Benjamin raised an eyebrow, but handed over the heavy steel bar. Madeline approached the back wall, jammed the flat end of the bar behind one of the acoustic tiles, and leaned her weight onto it. The tile snapped off in a cloud of dry, yellow dust. Behind the tile wasn't the expected brick or plaster. It was a sheet of solid, reinforced steel. Benjamin let out a low whistle, stepping fully into the room. "Well now, that ain't up to fire code. What the hell is a steel plate doing behind a sound wall?" "Help me tear the rest of these tiles down," Madeline said, her pulse hammering in her ears. Together, they ripped away the decaying foam and acoustic board. Over the next hour, a massive structure was revealed. Built flush into the brickwork of the theater's rear wall was a custom-made, heavy-duty vault door, complete with a mechanical combination dial and a heavy keyhole. It was seamlessly integrated, hidden completely from the naked eye. "That's a bank-grade vault," Benjamin muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes wide with greed. "In a ruined theater. Lady, what did your granddaddy leave you?" Madeline looked down at the heavy iron key in her trembling, dust-covered hand. 40 million in ice. She stepped forward and slid the iron key into the vault door. The heavy iron key slid into the vault's mechanical lock with a satisfying metallic clunk, but it refused to turn. Madeline jiggled the cold iron, her frustration mounting as the rigid internal tumblers held firmly in place. "It needs a combination, sweetheart," Benjamin drawled, his voice losing its previous gruff indifference, replaced now by a low, vibrating intensity. He took a step closer, the heavy steel pry bar still resting casually against his right shoulder. "You can't just turn the key. That's a dual custody locking mechanism. Unless you have the numbers, that door is staying shut until the next ice age." Madeline stepped back, her mind racing. The journal. She desperately flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages of her grandfather's black leather notebook. The air in the projection booth suddenly felt stiflingly hot. She scanned the jagged handwriting, looking for anything that resembled a sequence of numbers. "Come on, Grandpa," she whispered under her breath, a bead of sweat tracing the curve of her spine. "You wouldn't lead me right to the door and lock me out. What is the code?" Her eyes darted back to the entry that had started this entire discovery. October 14th. "The Antwerp consignment is too hot. Interpol raided the docks in Brussels. We are sitting on 40 million in ice." She looked at the date. October 14th, 10 to 14. Then she looked at the second entry. November 2nd. "Bought the Orpheum today. A perfect tomb." November the 2nd. 11:02. Could it be that simple? 10:14:11:02. She stepped back up to the massive steel door. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the polished brass dial. 10, she muttered, spinning the heavy dial to the right. It clicked softly. 14, she whispered, spinning it back to the left. Another click. 11 and 2. She grabbed the iron key and twisted. A loud, hollow thud echoed from deep within the steel casing. The locking bolts had retracted. Benjamin let out a breath that sounded like a hiss. "I'll be damned." Madeline grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled. The hinges, surprisingly well-oiled despite decades of neglect, swung outward in absolute silence. A rush of cold, perfectly dry air washed over them, carrying the faint scent of machine oil and aged canvas. Madeline raised her heavy-duty flashlight, sending a beam of brilliant white light into the dark cavity. The vault was roughly the size of a walk-in closet, lined floor to ceiling with reinforced steel shelving. Sitting on the center shelf were 4 heavy, olive-green canvas duffel bags, the kind used by the military. Next to them sat a stack of red leather-bound ledgers. Madeline stepped inside, the hairs on her arms standing on end. She reached for the nearest duffel bag, her fingers fumbling with the heavy brass zipper. As she pulled it open, she directed the flashlight beam inside. The light hit the contents, and suddenly, the dark vault erupted into a blinding constellation of prismatic color. "Oh my God," Madeline breathed, her voice completely stripped of its strength. The bag was filled to the brim with tightly sealed, transparent vacuum pouches. Inside each pouch were thousands of diamonds. Some were brilliantly cut, catching the light and throwing rainbows across the steel walls, while others were rough, uncut stones, looking like shards of frosted glass. It was a king's ransom, a staggering, impossible fortune hidden in the decaying walls of a forgotten Detroit theater. "Ice," Benjamin whispered, his large frame suddenly blocking the vault doorway. His shadow swallowed Madeline entirely. She turned, her heart skipping a dangerous beat. Benjamin's eyes were no longer those of a weary contractor. They were wide, glazed with a terrifying, primal greed. He lowered the pry bar from his shoulder, gripping it tightly in both hands. "Benjamin," Madeline said, her voice perfectly even, though her knees threatened to buckle. "We agreed on $3,000 and the architectural salvage." "That was before I knew we were standing on a diamond mine," Benjamin rasped, taking a slow, menacing step into the vault. "You think I'm gonna let a little girl walk out of here with $40 million while I go back to breathing asbestos for pennies? Leave the bags, Madeline. Walk away. Hey, tell the city this place was a bust." "You can't sell these," Madeline lied, thinking furiously. "They're highly documented. My grandfather kept ledgers. The moment you try to fence stones of this caliber, Interpol will lock you away forever. You need my grandfather's contacts to move them." Benjamin laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I know guys who can cut stones down. I'll take my chances. Now step away from the bag." He lunged forward, swinging his thick arm to shove her aside. But Madeline had anticipated the move. She dropped the flashlight directly into the duffel bag, temporarily blinding him with the refracted, blazing light of 1,000 diamonds. As Benjamin raised a hand to shield his eyes, Madeline grabbed the heavy iron pry bar he had left leaning against the wall moments earlier. She didn't aim for him. She aimed for the heavy steel shelving unit right above his head. She swung with all her might. The steel bar crashed into the metal shelf, dislodging one of the massive, heavy canvas bags. The bag plummeted, slamming directly into Benjamin's shoulder. He cried out in pain, stumbling backward and losing his footing on the slick metal floor. Madeline didn't hesitate. She grabbed the single duffel bag she had opened, snatching the stack of red ledgers with her other hand, and dove past him out of the vault. "You little—" Benjamin roared, scrambling to his feet. Madeline threw her entire body weight against the massive steel door. The perfectly balanced hinges swung shut with shocking speed. Just as Benjamin reached the threshold, the heavy door slammed flush against the frame with an earth-shattering boom. Madeline grabbed the iron key, still resting in the lock, and twisted it violently to the left. The heavy tumblers slammed back into place. A muffled, furious pounding echoed from inside the steel chamber, followed by Benjamin's muffled screams. Madeline leaned against the cold steel, gasping for air, her lungs burning. The vault was airtight, but there were ventilation slats at the top that tied into the theater's old HVAC system. He wouldn't suffocate, but he wasn't getting out without heavy machinery. She looked down at the olive-green bag at her feet and the red ledgers clutched in her trembling hands. The punchline of her grandfather's will had just become the most dangerous night of her life. She hoisted the incredibly heavy bag over her shoulder, grabbed the ledgers, and ran down the crumbling staircase into the Detroit night. 3 weeks later, the mahogany-paneled conference room at Abernathy and Associates felt exactly as suffocating as it had the day the will was read. Madeline sat at the far end of the sprawling table. Her frayed wool coat was gone, replaced by a sharply tailored, charcoal-grey blazer and a silk blouse. She sat with perfect, unwavering posture, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup. Across from her, Aunt Evelyn and Cousin Gregory looked distinctly uncomfortable. Gregory was nervously tapping his designer pen against his knee, while Evelyn's usual icy composure seemed cracked, her lips pressed into a thin, anxious line. Mr. Abernathy sat at the head of the table, looking deeply perplexed. "I must admit, Madeline," Mr. Abernathy began, adjusting his spectacles, "I was entirely surprised by your urgent request for this meeting. Even more surprising was the notification from the city of Detroit this morning. The $380,000 tax lien on the Orpheum Grand Theatre has been paid in full. Evelyn gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the quiet room. Paid? How on earth could she afford that? She's a graphic designer, Gregory scoffed, leaning forward. Did you take out a predatory loan, Maddie? You're just digging a deeper grave. The property is condemned. The property, Madeline said, her voice smooth and echoing with absolute authority, is currently undergoing a massive structural renovation. The asbestos has been cleared, the roof is being rebuilt, and the structural integrity is fully secured. I expect the grand reopening to happen by next autumn. Renovation? Evelyn sputtered, her face flushing an ugly shade of crimson. That will cost millions. Where did you get that kind of capital? Madeline smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that looked terrifyingly like her grandfather Harrison's. After trapping Benjamin in the vault, Madeline had anonymously tipped off the local police about a squatter trapped in the Orpheum, ensuring he was arrested for trespassing the next morning. Then she had driven straight to New York City. She didn't go to a pawn shop. She sought out Peter van der Hout, an exclusive, hyper-discreet diamond broker in Manhattan's Diamond District. When she placed the uncut stones on his velvet mat, Peter had gone dead silent. The diamonds were completely untraceable, a forgotten ghost shipment from 1982. He wired $12 million into an offshore trust in her name within 48 hours, taking a substantial cut for his absolute silence, while she kept the rest of the stones secured in a Swiss safety deposit box. But the real treasure wasn't the diamonds. It was the red ledgers. I found some things in the theater, Aunt Evelyn, Madeline said, reaching into her leather briefcase. She pulled out a heavy red leather-bound ledger and placed it deliberately in the center of the mahogany table. Grandpa Harrison left a very detailed diary of his extracurricular logistics. Evelyn's eyes locked onto the red book. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. What is this nonsense? Gregory demanded, reaching for the book. I wouldn't, Madeline warned softly. Gregory froze. That ledger details exactly how the maritime empire was funded in the late 70s. But more interestingly, it details the events of October 1982, the Antwerp job. Mr. Abernathy frowned deeply. Madeline, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Mr. Abernathy, Madeline said, never taking her eyes off Evelyn. I am stating a fact, supported by handwritten, undeniable evidence. Grandpa Harrison was running a smuggling ring, but he didn't do it alone. His silent partner, the one who managed the European port bribes, was Evelyn. That is a lie, Evelyn shrieked, slamming her hands on the table, her composure shattering completely. Is it? Madeline asked, flipping the ledger open to a dog-eared page. Grandpa details how you, Evelyn, tipped off Interpol during the Brussels raid to eliminate his European buyers. You wanted to seize complete control of the legitimate maritime company, while he took the fall for the smuggling. But he outsmarted you. He intercepted the cargo, hid it, and bought a ruined theater to serve as a vault. You spent the last 30 years thinking the cargo was lost at sea. You hated him because he held the legitimate business over your head, knowing what you did. Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating. Gregory stared at his mother, his jaw unhinged. Mum, what is she talking about? Mr. Abernathy, Madeline continued, turning to the lawyer. My grandfather's will stipulated that Evelyn and Gregory inherit the liquid assets and the maritime company. However, There is a morality and fraud clause in the founding charter of Hughes Logistics, isn't there? Mr. Abernathy, looking thoroughly shocked, slowly nodded. Yes. Any board member or founding partner found guilty of financial sabotage against the company forfeits their shares back to the primary estate. Exactly, Madeline said, leaning back in her chair. I have already sent copies of these ledgers to the federal authorities and the IRS. Evelyn used embezzled company funds to pay those European bribes. The fraud is undeniable. The government will seize her assets by the end of the week. Evelyn and Gregory will lose every single penny of the $14.6 million they inherited. You little witch! Evelyn screamed, lunging across the table. Gregory grabbed her arms, pulling her back, his face pale with sheer terror. Mom, stop. Is it true? Did you do it? Evelyn didn't answer. She just stared at Madeline with a venomous, unbridled hatred, her chest heaving as she realized her life of luxury had just evaporated into thin air. Grandpa didn't give me the Orpheum as a joke, Madeline said, standing up and buttoning her blazer. He gave it to me because he knew I was the only one in this family with the grit to clean up his messes, and the only one who deserved the reward hidden inside. She picked up her briefcase, leaving the red ledger sitting ominously on the table. If you need to declare bankruptcy, Evelyn, Madeline said, pausing at the heavy oak doors, echoing her aunt's exact words from weeks ago. I know a very affordable paralegal. Madeline walked out of the conference room, the sound of Evelyn's sobbing echoing faintly behind her. A year later, Sycamore Street was unrecognizable. The Grand Marquis of the Orpheum Grand Theatre blazed with thousands of incandescent lights, illuminating the block in a warm, golden glow. A line of patrons in evening wear wrapped around the corner, waiting to enter the fully restored, breathtaking Art Deco masterpiece. Madeline stood in the projection booth, looking down through the glass slots at the stage where a jazz orchestra was tuning their instruments. Behind her, the massive steel vault door remained permanently open, converted into a high-end, climate-controlled wine cellar for the theater's VIP lounge. She had paid off the debts, outsmarted a greedy contractor, and brought down the aunt who had sneered at her poverty. The punchline was over. Madeline was the one writing the script now, and the show was just beginning. If you are absolutely captivated by Madeline's brilliant revenge and her incredible discovery hidden inside the ruined theater, don't keep this story to yourself. Hit that like button right now to support the channel. Share this video with your friends who love a jaw-dropping plot twist, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, real-life, dramatic tales. What would you do if you found a secret vault? Tell us below.